and welcome. I'm Beth. I am 50% of the Made for TV Movie Club podcast, and this is our YouTube channel, MFTVM Now Playing. Today I have the honor of speaking with Joel Brokaw, the author of a biography of his father, Norman Brokaw, called Driving Marilyn, The Life and Times of Legendary Hollywood Agent Norman Brokaw, which is available now. The Library Journal writes that this is a fascinating look at an authentic Hollywood influencer told with affection, honesty, and unprecedented access to the memories of numerous legends. One of the things I loved about what they said there, which is really true, is that your father is really one of the first true original influencers. Like we think of them today in terms of Instagram and stuff, but he really was the manager and carer for very many careers.
Well, most certainly, if you look at American popular culture over the last, I would say between the late 40s to the first decade of the 21st century, his fingerprints were all over most of the major developments, both in the people who he represented, but also in some of the changes that he had pioneered.
Yes, I agree with that. Okay, so let's go back a little bit and talk about, he was born in 1927. He passed away in 2016 at 89 years old. He was married 3 times, and you are one of his 6 children.
Correct.
He served as president, CEO, and chairman of the William Morris Agency, which is today called the William Morris Endeavor. And among those people he represented were Marilyn Monroe, Donna Summer, Mark Spitz, Warren Beatty, Clint Eastwood, Barbara Stanwyck, Andy Griffith, Natalie Wood. I could go on and on, right? He also co-founded the Betty Ford Cancer Center and served on the board of trustees for Cedars-Sinai Medical Center and the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which is really dear to my family's hearts because we have a close family member who was a patient there when he was a child. So he began his career working in the mailroom at William Morris Agency, but he was the first mailroom trainee to become an agent, and he got his start from his uncle, Johnny Hyde. Could you talk to that a little bit?
Sure. Well, my grandmother, who was Johnny Hyde's sister, when they were children, they were part of a Russian acrobatic dance troupe that came over to America in 1898.
Wow.
And they were very, very popular because at the time vaudeville was king and they were called the novelty act. So it was something that people just had never seen before. And they had these very colorful costumes. And like anything else, the children grew up. The parents, my great-grandparents, disbanded the group, and they all had to go into different fields. And my grandmother learned English the fastest, and she was booking the group as a child, dealing with all of the theater owners and agents. And so she developed relationships. And so when Johnny became older, she got him a job with one of the agencies who she befriended. And so that's how his career started. But he was really one of the first big super agents. He handled so many huge talents from the Marx Brothers and many, many others. But he was also the man who discovered Marilyn Monroe. And
Yes.
So my Johnny Hyde felt badly for his sister because she had suffered a number of deaths in the family. Her husband had died when my father was just 13 years old. And a couple of years later, she lost one of her sons in the war in the Philippines.
Wow.
And plus she also had a rather serious heart condition going on at the same time. So as much as Johnny Hyde did not want to open the floodgates of nepotism in the family, he felt badly, and he gave my father that opportunity to become the first mailroom trainee in the legendary William Morris mailroom, which was a breeding ground for so many moguls in the business. But my father saw that opportunity as being something that he wanted to take full advantage of. He saw that it was not going to come around again easily. So he applied himself. He also didn't want to be known as Johnny Hyde's nephew. So he wanted to establish himself and be accepted on his own merit, which he very quickly did. But it was the curious thing about my father was that he had such gratitude for that opportunity that he paid it forward to hundreds of people, giving them also opportunities and discovering people, a maitre d' in a restaurant, and he might say, "You have something really special. Come and see me." He loved talent. He recognized talent not only in the movie stars and actors and singers, but he also saw it in people in general. And he was very kind-hearted and generous in spirit.
You talked about a little bit about nepotism, but I think, and you probably understand this because you've been in the entertainment industry, but I think nepotism might be helpful. It may or may not be, but I think you have to really prove that you have some kind of talent or drive or intelligence or all of those things to make it in the industry, which I think you're just the testimony of so many people who he was so beloved speaks to that, what I just said about nepotism and how you can overcome it. And as you were saying,
go
ahead.
I think that once your foot is in the door, then it's all up to you,
right?
Because if you play the nepotism card too hard, then people will say, well, he achieved all of that because of his family. And if he succeeded, if he's not successful, then people will say, oh, he didn't measure up to them. So you have to kind of really move away from it as quickly as possible.
I agree with that. Okay, so there was a little story I'd love for you to tell that was in the book about when your father was a father, or when your father was a child, pardon me, and he went to take piano lessons and he wanted to take it at a certain time because
Correct.
of what happened afterward. Could you tell that story? Yeah. I love it.
Well, it was really kind of testimony that my father's creativity and genius was on display at a pretty early age because he was he was very innovative in his own way. I mean, in his school in New York, he had convinced his principal that he should be let off school because it was a Jewish holiday, which didn't exist. And furthermore, the rest of the kids in the school who were of Jewish ancestry were also given the day off. And so it showed how he had this power of persuasion and was a good salesman, but he got punished for it. The other thing that I loved from his childhood was that being of European background and being in a performing family, all the children were expected to learn a musical instrument. So he had piano lessons at a nearby apartment building. They, at that point, lived in the Bronx. And my father timed the piano lesson for to coincide when the baseball games at Yankee Stadium would be finishing. And so he would go to his piano lesson with his baseball glove and a baseball. And just as he would be arriving there, Lou Gehrig would be coming to his home after the game. And so they started playing catch together as a ritual. And the relationship developed to the point where Lou Gehrig first called him Sonny, and then after a few times it was calling him Normie. So that was a great story.
I love that story. It's so amazing. I mean, and to think he was just a child at the time and he managed to meet somebody who was so looked up to and famous.
Yeah. I always say about my father that he saw opportunity around him, especially where other people saw limitations.
Right.
He was very creative.
Right. And so let's talk about that a little bit too. So when he was with the William Morris Agency, he was working in the movie division, and then they moved him over to the television division which he sort of considered it a demotion, but he actually thrived in that position as well. So what were the primary reasons for this move? Why did they want him to work in television? And then what challenges did he encounter when he was making that transition?
Sure. Well, basically, it's hard for us to imagine what life was like before there was a television set, and now, of course, we're seeing everything off of our telephones. So technology and innovation has always been a part of this business from day one. And at the time, television, the experience that you're talking about right now was at the very early days of television. And at that point that we're talking about this, they didn't even know what it was going to be called. And his boss, a gentleman named Abe Lasvogel, who was also very famous, he started the USO, incredible gentleman. And he said, I'm going away to New York, but I want to meet with you when I come back, and I'm going to talk to you about something which we think is going to be called television.
Wow.
And my father was having the time of his life, going to movie premieres and taking all these actors and actresses around, and starting to get his reputation in the movie business. And he sort of says, "Is this a demotion?" And he was very upset and depressed. And then he got called into the office and said, "This is going to be an important part of our business. And I want you to open the West Coast television department." And so my father said to him famously, "How do you want me to proceed?" And Mr. Lasvogel said to him, "I leave that up to you." So my father went home with a blank piece of paper, and he came up with a great idea, which was, at that point, most of what you could find on television were live performances, news broadcasts, maybe a baseball game or wrestling or bowling, and some live music. But there wasn't a lot of dramatic or comedy programs, except for people like I Love Lucy, who was really launched the in-studio filmed programs. But there wasn't really, no one was kind of jumping into it. And my father was given a television set, which he had in his apartment. And to tell you the nature of it, it was not very many people had TVs at home. And so the neighbors would come by, and they couldn't sit on the sofa and watch it because it was so small that they had to all stand around this television. So this is like talking about really the early days. So long story short, my father thought hard and said, well, there are a lot of actors from the movie business who have an established name, but maybe they're not working as much as they used to. So he made a list of those people. And then he made a list of some of the below the line people, the directors who had specialized in 10-day wonders, which were these low budget, quick turnaround movies, and made a list of them. And lo and behold, that was the genesis of a whole slew of dramatic programming that came about. And he had some ridicule from some of his colleagues to say, one of them said, he's signing dogs and cats. So in other words, he felt like he was bottom feeding on these people and signing them to contracts. And that was kind of below the dignity of the agency to do that. But his boss supported him, saw that that his innovation should be supported. And as I said, that really started the whole TV series business big time. And the next challenge was trying to get some of the movie stars with the big names to jump over. And that was the next thing that Norman was able to achieve. And he had represented Loretta Young.
Yep.
And said to her, here's an opportunity for you. And Loretta was an extremely brilliant businesswoman. She was an empowered woman before that term was known. So my father said, you could do what Lucy and Desi are doing and own your program and have that kind of control and have that kind of profit. And it was, fairly lucrative at the time to produce and own your own programs. Plus the fact Loretta was a very spiritual and principled person, and she liked the challenge of it and wanted to do an anthology show where she said that she would be able to put one big idea in front of mainstream America each week. So as soon as she did that, other people started to jump in, and it just took away the stigma that big movie actors could also find opportunities in television.
Yeah, I think that's amazing that he made that happen, especially because then, as we do today, we started to see like bigger stars moving between movies and television. Some start on television, then they go to movies and vice versa. And I love that today because it makes viewing television so much more exciting of an experience.
Absolutely.
Like, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, and ironically, what you just talked about was also something that has my father's fingerprints on it, because once the movie actors went into TV, the next problem that developed was that the people who started in TV were not being accepted for movie roles, and that changed because of a gentleman who my father signed to a contract named Clint Eastwood.
No, I haven't heard of him.
Yeah, and so basically, what happened was Clint really wanted to do films, and there was a lot of resistance. Then there was an agent with the William Morris Agency in Rome who came to my father and his colleagues with an offer for Clint to do a film in Italy. And at the time, outside of people like Rossellini and Fellini, Italian movies were kind of costume dramas with people walking around in togas and wearing sandals and fighting each other off of chariots. And so it was considered to be something, well, they're not getting work in Hollywood because the studio system has gone down the tube, so they have to go over to Italy and pick up some quick dollars to pay their mortgage. So it didn't have the greatest reputation. And so, but Clint wanted to do this film. And because some of these Italian producers were not known for paying their clients very quickly, they had to kind of come with the money, and it was almost like a drug deal. In the parking lot of the agency, one of the business affairs attorneys for the agency met one of the producers for the film and was given like a brown paper bag with some cash in it. And lo and behold, Clint Eastwood went over, made the movie. A few months later, a film can arrives, and they screen it at the agency. And even though it wasn't dubbed into English, they didn't understand a word of it. They all said, "This is a huge film." And of course, that was a fistful of dollars. So when that happened, then suddenly the stigma as well of TV actors going into movies started to diminish as well.
Oh, that's amazing. So the book opens with a quote from Kim Novak that says, "I have never known anyone who was so eager or so positive." She's also said, "Norman spoke my language." So why do you think she felt this way, and what factors influenced their professional relationship?
Well, again, I think that, my father basically, he was, as I said, very generous in spirit. And George Slaughter, who many of your viewers may know, who started the television show Laugh-In in the 1960s,
Sure.
said of him that Norman Brokaw was an agent, a manager, a lawyer, an accountant, and a psychiatrist. And so basically, and he said, I could walk into his office with a problem and walk out with a solution. And so my father did not set any kind of boundaries or limitations of how he might be able to help his clients. He regarded them as family, and he cared about them, and he put their needs first. And that, of course, came with a price, because his personal life was not as successful as his professional life, because he gave so much energy to his clients, and they loved him for it, and they trusted him for it, which was another challenge that I had in writing this book, was that he never wanted to say anything bad about any of his clients. And I had, just in terms of some brief background, I had started to interview him to get some of these stories down. And unfortunately, he had dementia, and it was kind of diminishing returns as we move forward. So then I had to go out, and after he passed away and this book project came to fruition, I had to round up who was still around, who had witnessed these, who had been a part of these stories, and kind of piece together forensically what I could. But the main theme, the thing that really astonished me, was just how beloved my father was. That when I would ever call anybody, like from Robert Wagner or Kim Novak and Tony Orlando, it's like Mark Spitz, I couldn't get these people off the phone because they had such gratitude towards him. Because they it's a, if you know any actors, even big actors, they're pretty insecure people. They're in that place of saying, is the telephone ever going to ring again? And it's kind of, they're in a childish profession. They're pretending, and so there are a lot of people who incinerate themselves because it's just such a meat grinder of a business. But my father was there really to be just a rock in their lives, and they just so appreciated that. And they say about him that, oh, he's the last of a dying breed, or they don't make him people like him anymore. And that may be true to a certain extent, but one of the things that I really hope people will come away from in reading this story is that the values that he represented are still important, which again, it's not, I think we've become a much crueler society. And I feel that, kindness doesn't really cost anything. And people are, smallest acts of kindness come back and reward you in the most spectacular ways sometimes. And the other thing, too, was that he wasn't someone who said, what's in it for me? He would say to his clients, what can we do together to help you achieve your goals and your dreams? And that was a sincere, heartfelt energy that he had, and people picked up on that. And that's why he rose from the mailroom to the boardroom and kept clients for decades and decades.
Yes, because he obviously had really good instincts too, just based on the level of talent that he managed. But I'd love to talk a little bit now about the title, and if you could speak to a little bit about your father's relationship with Marilyn Monroe and her meeting with Joe DiMaggio and whatever else you want to talk about about her.
Yeah, I mean, I think to really give a bit of a disclaimer, I know a couple of people have contacted me and said they were disappointed, that they hoped that the whole book was going to be about Marilyn, and it's just really a small chapter. And my father was involved with her in the very early stages of her career when she was just getting started. His uncle, Johnny Hyde, just before he passed away in 1952, had finally got her a contract with 20th Century Fox. And that's after years of talking to people, and she was kind of like this year's blonde, quote unquote. And so it was heavy going, but Johnny had a very bad heart condition, and after a while he was just too sickly to be hands-on with her career. And so my father was in charge of driving her to audition at the SAG minimum of $55 a job. And he would take her to openings and events and, kind of do that schlep work. But he enjoyed it. He liked her. They had a good rapport. And the one incident that you referred to about Joe DiMaggio was that my father had booked her on a television show, local television show in Los Angeles that was kind of a showcase for up and coming talent, and all the casting agents would watch this show, and so it was considered a good thing to do. And plus, they would have a little piece of film called kinescope, which is basically they pointed the film camera at the television monitor, and that was the way you recorded the early television at the time. So he would have that to shop her around with. So in any case, she does the show, and they said, let's go and have a bite. So they walked down the street to the Brown Derby, and the Brown Derby was definitely the place to be seen. And they were noticed very quickly. So what happened was they sat at their table, and after a while, Bill Frawley, who was Fred Mertz in I Love Lucy, walked over to the table, and my father introduced her and said, this is a young woman named Marilyn Monroe who we believe very strongly in, et cetera, et cetera. And Bill Frawley kind of cut to the chase. And it sounds really kind of creepy now in the Me Too era, but he said, I'm having dinner with Joe D, and he would love to meet the young lady. We'll stop by at your table after we're finished. And Marilyn Monroe said, turned to my father and says, who's Joe D? And so my father had to give her a short history of baseball and all the luminaries from Babe Ruth on down. And Joe DiMaggio had just retired from the game. So this is about 1951 or early 1952 when this happened. Long story short, Marilyn and Norman finished their meal before Bill Frawley and Joe DiMaggio had finished their meal. So they walked over to the table, and my father had warned her beforehand that I'm sure that Joe is going to call my office and ask for your phone number, which he did. And, we kind of know that didn't work out that great. But that's how it all started. And, certainly kind of part of the Hollywood mythology.
I do think, though, that if you had written more about her in the book, it might have been a little bit of a disservice to your father, because he had so much more to his story than just Marilyn Monroe or, any of the other experiences that he had.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, he was someone who really looked at every day that he was in the business as a chance to learn something new. And so I'm sure that being around Marilyn in those days, he was learning things that he was able to apply to all of the talent that he worked with. And, it was really all about showing up and being present and being caring. And that's the way he was with her. And that's what he continued throughout the rest of his career. I mean, there's one story that I talk about, Kim Novak, in which my father had to go to Rome to quote unquote break up her new relationship with a false Italian count. And because she had a studio contract, and she had to start a movie, and she was having the time of her life and head over heels in love with this very charming man who, was called himself Count. And any case, I mean, you would think that that's a pretty horrible assignment to knock on someone's door and say, hey, listen, you got to knock this off and come back home. You got a contract. But he did it in a way that was just fantastic. And he just, was able to make her feel like like he was on her team, he was on her side, but also was looking out for her. And she referred to him as my big brother. And and that was a relationship that, as I said, lasted until his final days. And again, another person who was so eager to participate in this story, which again floored me, because I just didn't really know the depth of affection that his clients had for him. And there's tons and tons of stories of times in which he stepped up when people were in some kind of a crisis and was able to make them feel better about themselves and give them something that they could put to use in their lives. And he did it sometimes in really entertaining and ingenious ways, in very small ways, but he knew how to boil it down to the core and get them to see another way. And I just, as I said, that was so much fun uncovering a lot of those stories about him.
Yes, I can imagine that it would have been just amazing to learn these things that you didn't know about your father, even though you knew about your father and knew a lot of his life story already. And as you said earlier, you had tried to work with him on a memoir, although, there were some limitations there with his ability to remember those things. But it's so nice that you're able to get that first person account from so many of these people.
For sure. I mean, in a funny way, I say that I got to spend an extra 10 months with him in spirit because I was so dedicated to writing this book, and he was in my thoughts, and I almost felt like I was communicating with him through the process. But, again, I think, we saw, my brothers and sisters and I saw a part of him that was very different growing up. We always recognized that he was working on something really special, and he was working with very talented people and making things happen for them and with them. So we knew that he was very accomplished, but we didn't really know the depth and the inner workings of that machine. Plus the fact he was quite different with us than he was with his clients. He was pretty controlling, and he was not really emotionally available. But that was, I think, part of growing up in the circumstances that he did, that there was a lot of loss in his family. And I think it created sort of a fear state with him that he didn't want his children to go through the same thing that he did. So if he didn't want us getting too emotionally involved with him, so that we wouldn't feel sad if he passed away.
I suppose, especially in light of that he lost his mother. So
he lost his father at age. He lost his father at age 13.
Yes, 13.
And that's like a time when a boy needs his father, moving into manhood, and so I think it created a bit of trauma for him around that, and so I mean, if we had a problem, if we were in crisis, and he was there right away. So we had no doubt that he loved us, but he just had a very limited bandwidth to show it. And yet with his clients, I mean, he was completely opposite. And so that was, as I said, kind of fun to discover and really understand the richness of his life, because I always felt like he didn't have a life. He didn't have friends outside of show business. He didn't socialize outside of his clients and all of that. And I said, God, what kind of life is he? Just some kind of alcoholic or workaholic, I should mean. And I kind of said that was a shortcoming. And then once I started talking to all these people, I realized that my view of him was very limited. My judgment was false, that he was having the time of his life, and he didn't need to go outside of that circle.
Oh, that's interesting. All right. So before I let you go, before you finish up, I want to know so you kind of spoke to this a little bit earlier, but I'm curious what you hope that readers will take away once they finish Driving Marilyn.
Yeah. So again, I think that I feel like this is a story about some very high impact developments in our lives in terms of popular culture, so that in a way we might have an appreciation for what has gone into it. That we all know about Marilyn and about Elvis, who my father worked with, and a lot of the names will be recognizable, especially to people who are a little bit older. But so just to get an appreciation for the fact that what went in to support these developments, and so that's more of a factual basis. But on a thematic basis, I feel like again, there are old school values that my father represented that really need to be revisited, because I have lots of friends that are working in corporate America these days, and the horror stories that they tell me of the backbiting and the internal competitions and all the issues that these people are facing just trying to do their work inside of their companies. Well, that wasn't the way of William Morris during my father's days. It was a family where you all supported each other and you all cared about each other and you all found ways to help each other. Not to say there wasn't bickering and problems and all of that, but it's kind of the same thing as what happens in a family. You might have disagreements, but you still care about each other. So I really feel like, maybe that whole idea that kindness doesn't cost anything, maybe something people can take to heart and sort of say, how would Norman Brokaw have dealt with this situation? And the other thing too is that, if he could help you, and this even applied to his competition, that if he heard somebody was having a personal problem or a medical problem, he would pick up the phone and call that person and say, hey, I know a doctor, a specialist in this. And I can't tell you, I wish I had $1 for every time somebody said, your father was incredible. He helped me. My mother is alive today because of what he did, and so forth and so on. So as I said, he just had an enthusiasm. And I think enthusiasm is a really important word. It's not a phony enthusiasm, but a heartfelt enthusiasm, because when you have that energy, people pick up on that. And I think that's what paved my father's incredible accomplishment in his life. So he made all of his dreams come true. It was all fueled by enthusiasm.
Wow, I love that. What a lovely thing to say about him. Well, so like I said, Driving Marilyn, The Life and Times of Legendary Hollywood Agent Norman Brokaw is out now. You can get it at bookstore, you can get it on Amazon, you can get anywhere you can get the book. So I recommend picking it up and taking a look at it. It is really interesting. It's full of so many wonderful anecdotes, and so I love the old Hollywood because my mother was such a huge movie fan. So I just really enjoyed reading the book because it just reminded me of so many things. My mother would have loved this book so much, especially your story about Ethel Merman. She was one of her favorites. So I thank you so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Really a pleasure. All the best.
Thank you.